And we're live.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everybody. While I get that out of my way, I am holding up a copy of Runtime. Actually, this is our only unsigned copy of Runtime. But the reason I'm holding it is we sold out of all of our signed copies of Runtime, but we have secured more and they should be in this week. So Catherine, felicitations on this wonderful book. Terrific cover.
Thank you. And today is the actual publication day, so I'm delighted to be celebrating it with you, and some water.
And in my case, tea. I thought I'd do the whole Irish thing here. I had toast right before we started with honey.
We'll have some bubbly later. We'll celebrate later.
Well, Catherine, as you all know, is on a different time zone, so it's more towards evening. One of the reasons we sold out is that I decided this book is described as a thriller, but it has so many interesting elements that set it apart that I decided this would be our notable new fiction book of the month for August, which is actually Catherine designed specifically for books that are not crime. But at the same time,
I snuck in there.
I know, but at the same time, it overlaps. And I think that, the way you structured this novel with the film script, with a movie script in it, really makes it different than, it sets it apart. Let me put it that way. And it's such a clever conception that I think that it works really well as a notable fiction book. So we are, well, for one thing, Catherine and I were talking right before we started. Catherine's brilliant book, 56 Days, got the pandemic out of the way, right? I said to her, you're the only person that I have read that, specifically tackled going into lockdown head on in Ireland.
I took one for the team, Barbara.
Well, I didn't look at it that way. I really thought that you made a masterful use of a real life event in order to structure a thriller where, again, as in this book, you have people in a very, just in their case, mostly two, but in any way, they're in a very tight location. It's, they can get out of it, but in theory, they're basically locked down. Actually, they were more locked down in 56 days than they are here on this estate in West Cork, because one of the characters actually says he can run into Bantry, which is the nearest market town, in the event that they need supplies. So did you experience lockdown yourself in the way that, not presumably entirely in the way of 56 days?
There was no murder, thankfully. I almost killed my neighbors because they drove me so insane. But besides that, I was here this time last year, and I was sort of hoping and praying that people would give 56 Days a chance, that they would, they would sort of set aside their unease about reading about the pandemic. I had no idea how it was going to go. So I can sit here and pretend that I knew exactly what I was doing and it was all a master plan. But really, I was writing a different book. It stopped working when the pandemic started because it involved international travel and stuff like that. And I just had this idea that I couldn't resist. And really, I didn't know whether or not it was going to be a good idea. My publishers didn't know, but we all sort of felt look, I didn't know I wanted to read a lockdown novel, but I want to know what happens next in this one. That's what they said when I sent them kind of a partial. So we went with it, and we all took a massive leap of faith, and it miraculously worked out. So, I can't really sit here with any authority and be I knew exactly what I was doing, and it was a great setting for a murder and all this kind of thing. I just got lucky, I think, with this intersection of timing and the idea and the way the world was, because one of the major things I think 56 Days has going for it is that it's confined to those very first few weeks, when certainly in Ireland there was a bit of a novelty still. We didn't know what was coming. If we had known how long it was going to go on, we would not have been as eagerly watching Tiger King as we were. So yeah, and then when it came to runtime, without sounding too cynical, I wrote this a year ago and I didn't know what the world was going to look like. So, in a way, rather than worrying about what I was going to do, was I going to mention the pandemic? Was I, and in case things got bad again, I wanted to take a really closed environment that even if things did get bad again, wouldn't be really affected by it. Because as we've seen with a lot of movie productions, they tested everyone and they took them away somewhere and they had a bubble, and that's how they filmed the movie. So it was a mix of wanting to write a kind of isolated horror movie style setting, but also future proofing the book against future pandemics.
Well, it was wildly successful, 56 days. It was, in fact, a New York Times and a Washington Post best thriller, and certainly sold very, very well. So, so good for you. But I have noticed, because we have Alice Beanie coming the 30th with Daisy Darker, and there have been some other ones that authors have really adopted remote closed settings. And I was thinking that it might have been a way of kind of processing lockdown, but maybe you're right. Maybe part of it is future proofing the book.
Well, I do think there is an element of like, we are all now acquainted with isolation in a way that we weren't perhaps 2 years ago. And maybe like naturally our storytelling minds are turning towards isolated places where we're cut off. But also just like in terms of a good crime novel, isolation makes for great peril usually. It makes for something really atmospheric. And I also think with so much stuff going on in the world, that kind of setting, like for me as a reader, just takes me away and takes me much further away than something set in a city or like a metropolitan area. So I kind of want to go in the woods or onto a tidal island, as in the case of Daisy Darker, which I loved, by the way.
It's a fascinating book. I wish unfortunately, the hardest part for me with Daisy is I can't compare it to anything with that, because if I do, the obvious author will completely give away what the plot. I'll tell you
Yes.
later.
I do think she herself is comparing it to that author.
Well, no, it's not the Agatha Christie thing. It's
Oh,
another
okay.
author. No. She
Okay.
says in all the publicity that she was inspired by And Then There Were None, which is her
Yeah.
favorite book. But Agatha Christie is far more straightforward. And what we're also getting is a revival of the Gothic. Agatha Christie's it's not a Gothic, even though it kind of has trappings of it. But in the end, it's not a Gothic at all. It's a serial murderer. So it's hard to talk about Daisy. Riley Sager's last book had some interesting elements. And in fact, I'm trying to remember, is this the book where the reviewer for Publishers Weekly said that Riley Sager fans were going to love Runtime? And there are no supernatural elements in Runtime.
No, but I think what that reviewer was probably thinking is like his books, like about the final girls, that he has a lot of kind of horror movie. I think he's a big horror movie fan himself as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's where they were coming from. But there's certainly no supernatural elements in this. Let's just be clear.
No,
Yeah, I don't do that. Yeah.
No, they're absolutely not. And that too, by the way, I could say has had a fair amount of revival, but that's true of genre fiction, is that some kinds fall away and then they, come storming back. And right at the moment, we're having a lot more horror and a lot more supernatural and Gothic with a capital G kind of coming in. But you're right, this is not. So the idea for, was it the idea for the structure of the story, or was it the idea for what happens to your lead character that came first? How did that work out? Because Adele Rafferty is certainly a woman that has been knocked off her feet, partly because she made an unwise decision herself, which we can talk about, and then sort of partly by circumstances.
Yeah, it was the idea of setting a book on the set of a horror movie. So my brother is an actor, and years ago, like 2016, he was in an Irish independent horror movie called Beyond the Woods, which was filmed in very suspiciously similar circumstances in this secluded house out in the middle of the Cork countryside, in the dead of winter, like mostly at night. And he had told me that one of the first things they had to do was visit the local Garda station, the local police station, and say, look, if someone calls you at 4 a.m. and says, I can hear screams coming from the middle of the woods, it's not someone getting murdered. It's just us filming this movie. But like, as a crime writer, I immediately thought, well, what if it was someone getting murdered? Like, a movie would be a great place to hide that. Now, as it happened, when I sat down to start writing the book, that idea kind of went by the wayside and it went in a totally different direction. But I always knew that the things that were happening in the movie that they were shooting would start to happen on set. And in the very first draft of the book, of course, I had to tell readers what the movie was about, otherwise that would lose all meaning. And in the first draft, I included an outline of the movie, which is essentially just like a boring synopsis of what happens in the movie. And it turned out it was pretty boring to read as well. I knew I was going to have to write the script for the movie. I was just putting it off because I didn't want to do it. But by the time we got to the second draft, I ended up putting the entire script for the horror movie they're shooting inside the novel so that the readers can understand the mirroring that's going on. And I also, like, this is my fun book. This is the book I wrote because it pleased me no end, and I was just cackling away at my desk, like having the time of my life writing it. And so I wanted to do fun things like put a movie script in the novel. So that's the structure then of like the kind of Russian doll aspect of the stories. That's when that really took shape. But originally, I just thought the set of a horror movie is a great place to set a thriller. That's where it came from initially.
Well, I think that was a brilliant idea. You were like struck by lightning. And actually, just to point it out, I don't think you can see it all that clearly, but
I think you can, yeah.
right. So the script is set apart in the text. It's a different typeface and setting and so forth. So while this is what the normal text looks like. So it's not confusing, when you're reading along, that when you've just stepped into the script. But let's talk about, did you originally conceive of Adele as a woman who had so screwed up that she exiled herself to Los Angeles from Ireland in the hope that nobody would be able to find her, that she wouldn't run into anybody from home, and that she could look for work, which was denied her in Ireland, without being embarrassed? Did that evolve?
Well, what's funny about being Irish is that you can't go anywhere and get away from people who know who you are, because there is Irish people in every corner of the world. So it was kind of foolish of her to run off to LA and think she wouldn't bump into anyone. But what I wanted to explore really was the dangers of wanting something like too much, because I have wanted this job since I was a child. And I'm incredibly lucky, especially over the last couple of years, that like things have really gone well and I get to do it full time and it looks the way I dreamed it would look and everything's great. But I often think, what would have happened if I didn't get that? Like, I don't know what I would be doing. I would not be happy. And when you want something in the creative industries, you can only do so much yourself. You're entirely dependent on other people's yes or hiring you or whatever it is. So I wanted to write about a character like me, but 10 years ago, maybe even more than 10 years, who, wanted something so, so, so desperately and hadn't got it, and how you would deal with that, because I don't think it's possible to just switch off the wanting. And if this is something that, Adele has had some success in Ireland. She's, I think she was on Ireland's second worst soap opera. She was a star on that. So people like knew who she was and would recognize her on the street. And when her career started to stall and go south, that failure was taking place in front of an audience. And that's why she up sticks and moved to LA to kind of fail in private, I suppose. But it was that idea of wanting something so much, too much, that I wanted to explore with Adele.
Well, I think you did that and you did it brilliantly, but unless I'm misremembering it, Adele is partly responsible for what happened because she mistook the great success of the soap opera for personal success. And
Yeah.
when she quit, I think it was a 14-year run, if I remember right, the way
Yeah.
you wrote it. When she quit, she was then had to face the fact that by herself, without the
Yeah.
soap opera, she wasn't nearly as successful. So you're right, that puts her in
Yeah.
that position.
I don't want to name any names, but in Ireland, we have a long tradition of actors and actresses who are experience, great success here and then leave for Hollywood and think that it will translate. And I can understand why. But it just doesn't. Most of the time, it doesn't work out. They're never heard from again. And I kind of wanted to. I wanted to explore the absurdity, really, of that kind of career. And like one of my favorite scenes is one of the first scenes where she's auditioning to be in a commercial, which my brother gave me a lot of insider info to help with. And I just love all that. Like, I really was having way too good a time at my desk writing this book.
Well, I couldn't help, I mean, facing the terrible trio at the trestle table as she, comes in to do her audition. Yes, I think it's humiliating, it's hair raising, it certainly, would make you doubt. An
Yeah.
example of what you're talking about, I never quite got over it, was the romantic lead in Downton Abbey. Do you remember he was in either
Yes. Yeah.
two or whatever seasons, and then decided that he was so
Was it
fabulous?
Dan Stevens?
That's
Is that?
it. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. That, he was so fabulous and all that he would swan off. And, and they wrote, Julian Simmons wrote possibly the dumbest exit. I mean, it was just absurd. And at that point, I lost all interest in Downton Abbey.
Yeah.
Not because of Dan Stevens' exit, really, but more about the way the producer handled it, which is something else you could write about at some point,
Yeah.
Although Julian,
Sequel.
what's his name? Simmons overcame this disaster, but I could also see that a situation like that could topple the career of a producer or a director
Yeah.
just as easily as anyway. I'm sure that Dan Stevens has shown up in a couple of things, but he never again has achieved the level.
And I was actually reading Busy Phillips, her memoir. She wrote, she used to be on Dawson's Creek and she was on some other TV shows, and she wrote a hilarious memoir. And really like personal and, honest about the whole business. And one of the things she talked about was when Dawson's Creek was at its height, the stars of the show, and she wouldn't have been like in the front line, she wouldn't have been the lead, she would have been sort of secondary to them. But she said that like they all wanted time off, they wanted to go and do these movies, they wanted the show to accommodate them. And she made a comment about how they didn't really understand that the reason they were getting all these offers was the show, and that the show wasn't something that was standing in the way. The show was what was giving them this career, and the sooner they left it, the closer they were getting to things going quiet. And that absolutely stuck with me when I was writing Adele, wanting to get out of this soap opera, because she thinks if only she had time, she could be taking up all these offers and her name will be in lights and she'll be getting Academy Awards. But actually it's the show that is generating all those opportunities for her, because it's keeping her in the public eye. So yeah, thank you, Busy Phillips.
Yeah, I remember years ago when Kevin Costner was at the absolute height of his fame. I can't remember whether it was Field of Dreams or whatever. Anyway, he had been increasingly absent from his wife and children, and his wife, the way I remember, gave him an ultimatum, because once you get into that whole stratosphere of fame, your life is completely different. And you have people that wall you off from the whole bit. And he actually was quoted as saying, this is my time. And, I have to seize it. And so he walked away from his whole family.
And then Waterworld happened.
Well,
that terrible movie.
I know, but I mean, hubris, I think, hubris, there's a whole Greek thing about hubris, but generally it was punished by the gods.
I mean, I think it's easy for us to sit here and be like, they shouldn't have done that. But I can imagine in that situation, it must be really difficult to understand intellectually that this isn't the way it's going to be forever. Like if you're getting all these offers and you're in demand and paparazzi are chasing you, and it just seems like, this amazing gold rush, it must be very hard to take a step back and remember that this is only temporary and this is just your 5 minutes in the sun, and down the road it'll move on to someone else. So I'm sure if I was in that situation, I would be taking off as well. I'd be like, this is my time.
Well, it's very human, no question about it. But anyway, so here's Adele, and she is working at the desk in a kind of shabby motel in Los Angeles. And of course, inevitably, somebody comes in and says, oh, Wendy, isn't it? Oh, you're Wendy. But she tries to deny. But that is not actually the trigger that that gets her on a plane back to Ireland. What is it that happens that sends her back home again?
Well, she just gets this call out of nowhere to ask her if she would consider replacing the lead actress on this horror movie that's shooting in West Cork called Final Draft, which is also the name of the software that screenwriters use. And that should have been her first sign that, this is not going to be up for Best Picture. But anyway, so she gets this call, and because it's last minute, because they want her basically on set, she just has enough time to fly to Ireland and then she'll have to be on set. She feels like they won't have time to kind of reconsider what they're doing. Like, this is ideal. This is her chance to get back on the horse, so to speak, or back on the stage rather. And so she accepts it, and she sees it like as maybe not her big break, but her second chance at a big break, perhaps. And she says yes, and off she goes. And I think she ignores maybe some little warning bells that should have been going off in her head, again, because of this wanting something so badly that you just jump at any opportunity to get it.
Well, to be fair, she does actually check. She's been dumped by virtually everybody, so her firm agent no longer represents her, but she does at least check with her former agent. And gets a kind of green light, that doesn't set off any, really the warning bells don't truly go off until she gets there, on the journey, flying business class, all excited, all exhausted too. I mean,
we should say it is legit. Like, it is a legit production. It's what happens afterwards. Things start to go awry. Yeah,
it does. I know it. It's and you must now. Did you always know? We can't talk about how it does it, but did you always have the design for how the plot unfolds in mind, or did you sort of write your way into it and it just turned out that way?
A little bit of both. Like, there's a moment, again, like we have the same problem last time, Barbara, we just cannot talk about anything specific, so I'm going to try and talk around it. But there's a moment, I'd say about a third of the way in, where she wakes up and discovers something, and I always knew that was going to happen. Like, that was the bit that I was really looking forward to getting to, because I love situations that seem utterly inexplicable, but don't have any kind of trickery or supernaturalness about them. I love something that is utterly confounding, where you're reading a novel and you're like, I just can't figure out what's going on here. But actually, by the end of it, you do get an explanation. Like, the mystery is kind of banished. But when you're first introduced to it, you just can't figure out what's going on. And, that's what I hope readers will feel. It's what Adele feels. She can't figure out what's going on either. But I knew that. I think who, let's say the villain is, if there is a villain in this book, that did change as the book evolved, but I kind of knew big picture what was going on from the beginning. Yeah. Well, I usually do know the ending when I start writing. So
good. Well, there's clearly more than one stakeholder here. So, good point. That, I mean, many thrillers, most thrillers, in fact, hinge upon a single bad actor, the antagonist, because basically a thriller is a chase or a contest between, the hero, the actor, and the antagonist, the bad actor. Sometimes it's multiple people depending, but usually that's how it goes. But this book is different. Adele has more backstory than we know. And, you did, I thought, a brilliant job of kind of leaking it out little by little, because in addition to the professional collapse, there's clearly something that was catastrophically humiliating or embarrassing for her, but you don't just like dish it out. We have to work for it going all the way through the book. So was that also part of your initial conception, or did that kind of grow as you wrote the book?
I think that was a grower. I think like that's something that got layered in the writing, because when I'm writing a first draft, I'm really just concerned with the big moments, with the big plot twists and, the actual superstructure. And then when I come to do the second draft, I get more into why are these people like this, and why are they making these decisions, and what has shaped them, and what are they hiding. And I think it was Lee Child possibly who said, suspense is asking a question and withholding the answer. So I love the idea of like drip feeding a little bit of information, because like my ultimate goal, I've said this before, I want people to be exhausted at work because they stayed up the night before, just like one more chapter, and time was ticking on. It was way past their bedtime, but they kept going. And I think if you do that drip feed of information and you kind of allude to things, but you don't fully reveal them, right off the bat, that's a great way to keep a reader reading. And I think it makes a much more satisfying novel on the other end, if you have those slow reveals.
Absolutely. And, in a fair play mystery, in theory, everything that the reader needed to know was on the page, and you just had to figure out how to put it together. But in a thriller, I don't think that is the same. So you can hint at it, but you don't actually have to have laid it out there so we could go, I knew all the time from page 7. That it was.
Yeah, I don't want people to know all the time from page 7. So what I feel is like my idea of playing fair is that you don't guess it, but if you ever reread the book, you will see that like things were clearly signposted. I just kind of distracted you from them. Hopefully, that's how I would hope that readers would feel, that if they ever come to reread the novel, they will see that like I wasn't playing unfair. Everything was there. It's just hidden.
And it's the film script in part makes this slightly longer, because I think it kind of finally comes in.
Yeah.
And there's a nice little wind up at the end, but it finally comes in at just about 400 pages with a nice little tiny dispatch at the end that kind of
which I urge readers, like I asked my publisher to put the acknowledgements at the front,
right?
Because if you're one of these people, and I'm one of them, who reads the acknowledgements first to be nosy, if you see the little article at the back of the book, you will ruin everything for yourself. So the acknowledgements are at the front. Be nosy, have a look at them, that's fine, but please don't flick to the back of the book.
This is that we had a wonderful conversation last week with the debut author, Hayley Scribner from Australia.
I loved her book. Loved.
Oh, good. Well, she and Sulari Gentle, who's bestseller, The Woman in the Library. Anyway, we did it all together. And I swear to you, we talked for 15 minutes out of the hour about acknowledgements, about how we're all crazy about acknowledgements, about how hard they are to write and where they should go, and, all the rest of it. And I mean, I do love acknowledgements. And I just warned readers of Ken Kruger's forthcoming book, Fox Creek, that they can't read the author note, because it could be an author note too. It doesn't have to be an acknowledgement, either one. They absolutely can't look at the author note, because if they look at it, the entire story, is revealed to them.
That's a dangerous game. That is a dangerous game to put your reveal in your author note.
I know.
But that's exactly, what I worry about. And like in the UK edition, the acknowledgements are at the back, but there is a blank page between them. So I'm just hoping no one is like, oh, what's that? And starts looking at this thing, which reveals everything. I'm actually sort of anti-acknowledgements. I don't know if you can, I have, oh no, that's a different book, but if you can see the acknowledgements in runtime, my acknowledgements are getting shorter and shorter and shorter because I abhor the 10-page acknowledgement list. There is no way that all those people genuinely helped you write this book. Like, I have a strict, you must have actually helped with the book or you don't get in.
Well, some of it too, I think, is just a way of naming everybody in your publishing company so nobody feels left out. And, the truth is the average reader really doesn't care. And so I'm not sure. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to be in the acknowledgments of many books, particularly C.J. Box once wrote a book. I'm trying to remember which Joe Pickett it is. And it just drove him crazy because I had the arc, and for some reason I was traveling or really busy, and I didn't read it, and I didn't read it. And I would get little emails from him, have you read it yet? No, I haven't, whatever. So I finally read it and discovered, you will love this, that Scottsdale was the killing field. The Poison Pen bookstore was the locus of what happened. And you haven't been to us, but there's a hotel near us called the Hotel Valley Ho, which is where all the authors stay. And the Valley Ho was the killer's lair. And, it was, and so I wrote finally my glowing, delighted review and sent it to him. And he said, finally,
she's read the book.
And it was in the acknowledgments, but, so I could have short circuited the whole thing if I just picked up the thing and read the acknowledgments, but it would have been nearly as much fun. But
it really surprises me, like, how many readers go to them first. They just, I think, especially in Ireland, because a lot of the crime authors know each other. There's not that many of us, and it's a small country, so I think a lot of the time they kind of get a kick out of seeing the other names and the acknowledgements and stuff like that. But with this one, I'm sweating. I'm just like, please don't look at the back of the book. Just
you did really very well. I really like author notes for historicals because I think it also helps remove temptation from the author to put too much of the factual stuff, the real stuff into the narrative. And for those who can't bear to let bits of it go, or whether there may be some confusion, maybe you have too many characters with the same name or whatever, an author's note is a great way to straighten that out. And in regular historical fiction, it really doesn't matter. But, if it's an historical mystery, it can be a problem. I'm also not crazy about lists of characters, although I think sometimes if you're really using, names like classical Roman names or something, and it's going to be hard for the reader, that it's not a bad idea. But I think there's some series where the whole thing about, the cast of characters sometimes it gets really cutesy. But anyway, that's not your problem here. So the other thing I wanted to ask you is, I find that much fiction depends upon a kind of stranger in a strange land setup, for a long time, there was a lot of obloquy hurled at a couple of Americans who dared to write British mysteries, the whole thing about, you can't get it right, on and on and on. But they chose to write British characters in a British mystery. Now, it's an easier ride if you send an American or an Irish or whatever, anyway, somebody else into that country. And then, their viewpoint, the mistakes they make are allowable or forgivable, because they're not actually natives. So in a way, you sort of did this with Adele in the sense that you took her out of Ireland, left her in Los Angeles for a while, and then you send her back, not only where she's been out of Ireland and therefore is slightly a stranger in a strange land, but you send her into a movie set in this weird place where she is clearly a stranger in a strange land. So, did you find that point of view made it easier for you to tell this story?
I think so. Certainly I can't see myself ever writing an American character. And, when I hear other writers talking about setting books in the States and writing American characters and giving them to a friend or whatever to check that they have all the the language right and stuff. Like, I think it is about so much more than just using the right words. Like, I think if you are born in America, you have a completely different mindset to someone who is born in Ireland. Like, it's a national identity, and it's about a lot more than calling something a nightstand instead of a bedside table, or a trunk instead of a boot. And so also, as a reader, if I want to read, you know, a mystery set in Ireland, I'm not really going to someone who isn't Irish for that. You know, if I'm looking to British and American authors for trips to Britain and America, you know, so I that's how I feel personally. And so my writing reflects that. I think when you send someone to a place like a movie set, you know, there was a lot that had to be set up, and there was a lot that had to be explained. And I didn't want to spend, you know, you were alluding there to the author note, when you do too much research and you trying to shove it all in. I wanted there to be as little kind of explanation of what was going on the set as possible. I didn't want this to turn into a guide to filming an independent movie. So Adele obviously knew how some things worked, but because I think she'd only done like one feature film and then things went awry on another one she was hired for, she was new to this as well. And so some of the little technical stuff that I put in there had to be explained to her, which is just a really convenient way of also explaining them to the reader without, you know, making it like, there's so many stories on TV and in books where you have, you know, the new guy, you have the new hire, and they're explaining everything to him, and actually they're explaining everything to the audience at the same time. So it's a good way to kind of, I think, settle in your reader and situate them without being like, this is how you do a movie.
Well, you're absolutely right. And of course, dialogue works better than anything else, you know, show, don't tell, or tell, don't show, actually, is what you really want to do. But I did think, you know, that the story gained power from the fact that Adele was, in fact, as I said, a stranger to all of this, even though she had some acting experience. Stage acting or TV acting and movie making, independent movie making, are clearly different creatures. So, you know, you really had a good time with this, I could tell.
I really did. And like, you know, it's not unusual that you would get hired to do an acting job, and then you arrive on set and you don't know anyone else who's there, and now you're living with them for, you know, a few weeks or whatever it is. And in this case, you're isolated with them. Like, that's how movies are made. Like, unless you're friends with everyone in the industry, you will probably end up going to these places to be with people who don't know each other and don't know you. And that's, you know, it's great for like a thriller writer or a crime writer to have that situation in real life, like without having to find a way to get a load of strangers together in one place. Like, just have them shoot a movie, because that's how it is in real life.
That's true. You don't have to have the Asian family patriarch summoning all of the potential heirs to explain that either one, he's rewriting his will, or B, he's contemplating marrying his 20-year-old secretary, which, you know, which kind of works out. But yeah, no, I think it worked extremely well. So now that you have written these two completely different novels that you and I have talked about, 56 Days and Runtime, what are you working on next? Because I'm sure you are actually working on a new book.
I mean, I was today, like it's
even on publication day, you're working.
I know. It's because I do it to myself, Barbara. Like, I could have finished this book ages ago. I had the time, but I was too busy watching Netflix and stuff like that. So it's always the way. I do all my work at the very, very end, and it's due in like a couple of weeks. So I'm, you know, most of the work is being done now. But for the next book, I'm going back to, I think, more like kind of Nothing Man territory, in the sense that like it's more serious, for want of a better word. So back in the 90s here in Ireland, we had a very famous case, which we call the Vanishing Triangle, where an unofficial tally of about 8 or 9 women disappeared without trace. We think 3 of them are connected to the same perpetrator. They were just you know, this is back in the day when you'd hitch a lift and there wasn't mobile phones, and, you know, public transport wasn't the way it is now. And they were just snatched off the side of the road. One of them was actually an American woman, Anna McCarrick, who was living here, a student. And here we are all these decades later, and no trace of them has been found. No one has been charged. We just don't know where they are, or what happened. And we have a sort of prime suspect who was charged with another similar crime, but no one has been charged for these. And this is what dominated the headlines when I was a teenager. So when I started paying attention to the news, what the news was telling me was that women were just being swallowed whole and never seen again. And I really can't believe that we're here all this time later and we still don't know where those women are. So the book I'm working on now takes a similar series of disappearances and puts them in the present day. And I'm also kind of paying homage to one of my favorite books, which is The Vanishing by Tim Crabbe, where you have someone who is so obsessed with finding out what happened to their loved one that they're willing to pay any price to find out, even if it means that they themselves have to suffer the same fate, because they're just so desperate to know. Like the torment is actually worse than the grief. And so they're the kind of ideas I'm exploring in the book. And it's the central character is a woman whose sister is one of the missing women, and she just has to know, and she takes matters into her own hands. So I think it's not, I'm not having as fun a time as you can imagine with that weighty matter, but you know, I want to kind of go back to 56 Days and The Nothing Man and that kind of like hopefully emotional experience, and also something that's really chilling. But like, it remains to be seen whether I actually achieve that, but I am drinking lots of coffee and trying to make it happen at the moment.
So you're an author who really doesn't envision a long-term series. You really like every book to be, you and Lisa Jewell have this in common. When we did our talk together a few weeks ago before Family Remains, it's the only sequel she's ever written. It follows on to The Family Upstairs. And I could tell that while she thought she had, you know, a way to do it that was interesting and exciting to her, she didn't love it. And I mean, she likes the book, but she didn't love the process. And she was going to go back to separate world building.
I was on a panel with Lisa at Harrogate, which is the big crime festival in July. So just a couple of weeks ago. Absolutely love her books. And I totally understand that, like, when I talk to authors who write series, they will say things like, you know, the groundwork is done and I know these characters and I know the world. And to me, that just sounds like a straitjacket. Like it just sounds like restrictions. You know, when you start with a blank page, a literal blank page every time, anything can happen. You're not tied to anything that you did in the past. You can kill anyone you want. You don't have to worry about like leaving enough, you know, thread for future books. I love reading series, but I just cannot see myself ever writing one.
You know, everybody's creative mind works differently. I love long running series. And I also recognize that in a long running series, some books are better than others. You know, some ideas are better than others, and depends on what's going on in the world and the author's life and so forth. But, you know, I also like reading books like Runtime. And, you know, there's no safety net in a book like this, because in truth, everybody can die. As opposed to if you're in a series, you know that the one person who's going to make it all the way through the book is the lead character. Otherwise, unless the author has, you know, John Sanford told me once that when he gets done with Lucas Davenport, he's going to call the last book Final Prey. He said, you will know, you know, you will know. And I thought, shit, you know.
Well, it just makes me think of Misery when, like, you know, he decides to kill off Misery's child, and Annie Wilkes doesn't take it very well. Like, I just think that when the longer a series runs, like Jane Casey, who we have over here, I think she must be on book 11 or 12 now.
She died,
and she has, sorry?
Didn't she just die?
No. I think Susie Steiner just passed away. Is that who you're thinking of, maybe?
Maybe I
Yeah.
have it confused. I know there was somebody that
Yeah,
sadly died very
Susie
recently.
Steiner had three books in the same series. She
Okay.
unfortunately passed away a few weeks ago. And Jane was actually a friend of hers, but Jane has like a long running, I think she must be book 11 or 12 now. And she has a kind of will they, won't they with her female detective and her colleague. And, you know, I feel like I see it on Twitter and stuff, the pressure she's under to like get these two people together. And if she decides that he's gonna run off with someone else or something, I don't know what she's gonna do with the reader reaction, because they start to feel like, you know, you owe your readers this, and this is what they want to see, and they're so invested in a series. Like all that kind of scares
Well,
me,
that's
really.
really true. I mean, you know, we're the home of Outlander, as you know, and it's hard to get any more invested ever than people have been in Jamie and Claire. So, and, you know, going back to our original conversation, as I'm going to call Ian up, I think, and Diana, I've talked about, it's remarkable that both Sam Hune and Katrina have not departed. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, Katrina made Belfast, which is a marvelous movie, and you know, Sam has done Men in Kilts or whatever, but they're sticking. You know, I mean, this is season 7 going to roll up. I don't know if it'll go beyond that. Nobody really knows. But you know, that's really pretty remarkable
Yeah.
for two such successful and truly charismatic characters who were doubtless besieged with authors every day to actually you know, stick with it is
Yeah.
a tribute, I think, all the way around. Ian, come and join us. Do we have any questions, or will we totally exhausted the audience?
No, I do have some questions here. First question is, who is publishing your book?
Oh, who is Blackstone or my American publishers?
They also do, it's also Blackstone Audio, but they have gone into publishing print books and they do a lovely job. I held up Runtime, but I want to say that I think Blackstone's books are of unusually high quality. The paper, the binding, the typeface, the artwork, and they went to all the trouble to get Catherine, who's in Ireland after all, to deliver signed copies to us. So they're a real joy to work with.
The next question is, what 3 writers, living or dead, would you like to meet?
Oh, it's the New York Times profile question. Love it.
Okay, so I would say we talked about Michael Connolly the last time I was here, and when I was in Harrogate, he was there too, and I actually passed him on the street, and I was like proud of myself that I did not like go crazy or do anything that would get me arrested. I'm afraid to meet him because I just don't even know what I would say to him. And everyone says, you know, he's the loveliest guy, and I'm sure he is. It's not him I'm worried about, it's me. But if there was a sort of controlled dinner party environment, I would have him there. I would also love to meet Gillian Flynn. I would just love to like ask her, where is the next novel? Because I'm waiting for it. And then, oh God, I don't know who else I would. Oh, well, living or dead, I would bring back Michael Crichton, because Jurassic Park is my favorite book of all time. And he inspired me to do this job, and I would love to meet him and talk to him about it. So there you go.
He's an interesting guy. I can actually make your Michael Connolly dream come true if you want to travel to Scottsdale.
I think it's too dangerous, Barbara. I just honestly, I don't know what I would say.
It really isn't too dangerous. We should talk about
I have been reading him since I was a teenager, and I think I would just like burst into tears or something. I would just make an absolute fool of myself. So it's safer to stay over here.
Those words just pierced my heart. Michael did his first ever book event at the Poison Pen, and he says he will do his last ever book event at the Poison Pen.
I hope that's not anytime.
I was over 50 when that happened. She's talking about reading him as a teenager. If I could do homicide.
I mean, I was an old teenager, Barbara. I was like 17.
Oh Lord. And he actually is as lovely a guy as you think he is, and you wouldn't be tongue-tied at all.
Honestly, it's not him I'm worried about, it's me. I would just start babbling, and I would be telling him how much I love Harry and how Harry is real to me, and I would just make a fool of myself. So it's just for the best that when I saw him in Harrogate, I stayed on the other side of the road.
I have a wonderful story to tell you. You will love this. I was in a taxi in Dublin with my daughter, and we were on a cruise ship. So we had to get back down to the harbor, but we were wandering around. I think we had been to the Writers Museum or something. So we're some taxi journey away. And I realized as we were approaching the taxi that I had completely run out of money. So
Right.
we get in the taxi, and I am holding a Michael Connelly ARC, advanced reading copy, because I need to be working on this cruise. So we get in the taxi, and I said to the taxi driver, I don't have any money, but would you take a credit card? And he said, you're reading Michael Connelly. And I said, yes. And he said, take a picture of me with it, he said, and that'll be okay. That's all I'm going to charge you. It was wonderful. I sent it to Michael, and I think, this is way back in early social media, but I have taken photos of Michael's books in Sweden and Ireland and Sharjah and all over the world and sent them to Michael.
That is so lovely. Like, what other country would accept a picture of a book as payment? I love it. I love it.
Well, no, it was him and the book and the book.
Yeah.
I would send it to Michael. It actually did that. All right, Ian, anything else?
That'll do it.
Wonderful. Well, Catherine, as always, the hour has flown by. But it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Felicitations on publication day for Runtime. And fortunately, Blackstone, the stellar publisher that we just mentioned, has supplied us with a few more. Do we have any left, Ian, or are those all gone too?
They're all gone at the moment, but we do have more on order.
So we do still have a few coming. Okay. Ian is in charge of all our mail and internet orders, so I can always ask him. In any case, don't miss this wonderful book, because it really is. And 56 Days is now out in paperback, if you happen to miss it. And I can truly recommend it it's just a novel, not quite like any other, and thoroughly deserved all the plaudits that it got last year. So congratulations, Catherine. I'll either see you on screen or maybe see you in person with your next book.
Hopefully on the next book, I will meet you in person.
That would be absolutely wonderful. Anyway, goodbye, everybody, and good night, Catherine. Go and drink all that champagne. Okay, bye.